It's a wonderful morning today, and we are fortunate to have our very own artist called Aja Bond, third year MFA student at the Department of Art at UMN. She works in the fertile ground at which grief, decay, art, and change intersect. And Aja uses compost, rituals, feminist science studies, writing, and social practice to ponder how human beings can become more closely attuned or related to the more than human world. Aja's art life stretches back for nearly 2 decades in numerous locales, from Santa Cruz to Cardiff to Vancouver, Berlin, and Minneapolis. And her exhibitions include solo show, All Day, I Dream About Soil, and I Love You, and I Don't Want You to Die, as well as upcoming projects. Her performance and installation work has been presented by dozens of museums, festivals, conferences, and community centers in North America and Europe. Aja is a writer and academic working in the areas of experimental ecological art practice, interdisciplinary practice with science and other disciplines, somatic awareness experiencing, and cultural work of composting. And Aja's work is not just artistic, it is also relational. She's worked to create and maintain community spaces for textile practice, mutual aid, death education, and ecological rituals, such as the State Library, Teen Art Magic, Ready or Not Privy Club. In a lot of ways, her work echoes what we have been reading this week around deep time, and Aja demonstrates how new works can start in the compost. And we are really glad to have Aja here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Hi everyone. It's really nice to be back. I TA'd this class last year, and I'm also in a class with Christina right now. This week we're working on artist talks, so I'm right on schedule. So the title of this talk is Timecraft, Traditional Skills as Futuristic Technologies. And it begins with a simple question. What if the technologies of the future are not the ones that accelerate us, but the ones that slow us down? I'm interested in how craft, and by that I mean the entire field of embodied, skill-based making, functions as both a method and a metaphor for surviving the future. My practice moves between sculpture, installation, and social engagement, but what connects these works is a preoccupation with time, with how materials record duration, how gestures accumulate, and how care becomes a form of resistance. When I use the word craft, I'm not necessarily invoking nostalgia. I mean a technology of relation, a set of techniques and values that teach us how to work with traditional skills, ceramics, sewing, mending, dyeing, weaving, as speculative tools. They encode ecological knowledge, social rhythms, and modes of attention that have survived collapse before. In that sense, the role of the maker is not just to produce objects, but to model ways of being that make futures more livable. Craft, for me, is a way of thinking about how we might inhabit time differently, how we might build futures sustained not by extraction, but by care and continuity. When we talk about craft and technology, they're often treated as opposites. One old, one new, one slow, one fast, one human, one machinic. But both are really systems for organizing knowledge and desire. They show us what a culture values, how it measures time, and what kinds of labor it celebrates or hides. If we think of technology not as devices, but as ways of making life possible, a network of tools, habits, ethics, and rituals, then craft is simply one of the oldest and most enduring forms of technology. In that light, craft becomes a counter-technology. It slows things down. It insists that learning happens through touch and repetition, not automation. It resists extraction by reminding us that every material has a cost and a lineage. Yet it's profoundly futurist. The traditional skills are adaptive, they're open source, and infinitely scalable because they're transmitted through practice and relation. They evolve through context, not obsolescence. In a world defined by acceleration and depletion, survival may depend less on innovation and more on maintenance, on our ability to repair, reuse, and remain in relation. That's what I mean when I say craft is the technology of the future. It teaches us how to keep going. And I actually forgot, but I have some hand things for people like me who are kind of fidgety. There's this wool that I spun into yarn from raw fleeces, like super stinky fleeces full of poo and pee and weeds and seeds. That came from the Navajo Nation, the Black Mesa community specifically, who have been resisting dislocation and contamination of their land for decades, if not centuries. And so I had the privilege of being able to purchase some of this wool as a form of mutual aid. And I, just taught myself how to do it, and it's really, really special to me. So I'm gonna pass around a bag, and there's some scissors in there, so if you wanna like cut off a piece and just play with it, you're welcome to. And the bag is also crocheted with the wool. Okay. Around this point, I like to bring in one of my main thinking companions, Ursula K. Le Guin. In her essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction, she rewrites the origin story of technology. Instead of a spear or a sword, she proposes the first human tool was a container, something to hold, to gather, to carry. For Le Guin, stories, and by extension cultures, aren't built around heroes and conquests, but around what we collect and share. The bag replaces the weapon. Care replaces victory. I think of craft as a carrier bag technology. The vessels, the textiles, the stitched seams, all of them are infrastructures of relation. They hold time, they store labor, and they keep things from being lost. When I'm working with materials, I'm not seeking climax or resolution. I'm making containers for attention, for memory, and for interdependence. One of my installations, pictured here, the carrier bag archway of fiction, takes this literally, an architectural form built from bags and books by dozens of speculative writers, Le Guin among them. It's a gate made not of triumph, but of stories that hold worlds together. Le Guin's idea reminds me that the future isn't something we conquer, it's something we carry carefully, collectively, and with both hands. Another companion in my thinking is Donna Haraway, whose work asks us to stay with the trouble. Haraway warns against the fantasy of purity or resolution, the idea that we can step outside the mess we've made and somehow design a clean future from a distance. Instead, she invites us to remain inside complexity, to make kin with the materials, species, and histories that have shaped us. For me, craft is exactly this kind of practice. To work with clay, wax, fiber, or soil is to accept that nothing is ever finished or separate. These materials crack, warp, melt, absorb. They demand collaboration rather than control. Making becomes a method for staying, a way to remain entangled with the world's failures and its possibilities at the same time. The slow repetition of the hand teaches an ethics of attention, a willingness to keep touching what's difficult, to repair rather than discard, to coexist rather than dominate. In Haraway's terms, this is a form of kin-making. Each act of mending or casting is a small negotiation between bodies, mine, the materials, and the ecological systems that hold us both. Craft, then, isn't a retreat from the world's trouble. It is a commitment to stay with it carefully and skillfully. The third thinker I return to often is Joanna Macy, whose writing on active hope offers an ethical compass for working in the face of uncertainty. Macy defines active hope not as optimism, but as participation, a decision to act for the sake of what we value, even when we can't see the outcome. It's the difference between wishing and doing. Craft, to me, lives in that same register. Every handmade gesture, every repair, every slow process of care is a small act of active hope. We work without guarantees that it will last, but we do it anyway, because the doing itself keeps the world intact a little longer. Macy's idea of nuclear guardianship deepens this even further. She asks how we might take responsibility for radioactive materials whose half-lives outlast civilization, how to create cultures capable of remembering danger for 10,000 years. I often think about this when working with long-lived or contaminated matter, such as soil. What practices of stewardship or storytelling could endure across generations? What kind of technologies, aesthetic or ritual or digital, might help us carry these memories forward? This is where craft becomes not just repair, but guardianship, a form of care extended through time, to tend, to witness, to hand knowledge on. That's active hope in its most material form. All of these ideas from Le Guin, Haraway, and Macy really come alive for me in the temporal logic of making. Traditional skills are not just techniques, they are archives of time. They encode endurance, patience, and interdependence. Each process, whether firing clay, weaving, or working with wax, demands attention over duration. It refuses immediacy. When I work with materials like beeswax, clay, soil, or textiles, I'm not only shaping matter, I'm collaborating with geological and ecological time. Clay holds the memory of the earth's pressure. Wax records every temperature shift and fingerprint. Fibers remember the tension of the hand. These materials teach me that time isn't linear. It pools, folds, and seeps. In that sense, to make is to rehearse the future through care. Each gesture becomes a small rehearsal for endurance, a way of practicing the kind of attention a sustainable world will require. The slow processes of craft become temporal laboratories, spaces where we test how long something can be tended, repaired, or remembered. Making, then, is a way of staying in time rather than escaping it. It's how I try to inhabit the future before it arrives. This piece is called Food Prep. It's an array of made and found objects arranged almost like a still life, a small ecology of nourishment and time. The central form, the one with the rock and the pillow, that looks kind of like a cupcake, is a passive cooling system, like a kind of clay cooler. It works through evaporation, keeping its contents cool without electricity. Around it are fermentation crocks, a set of 10 bowls, and a few old tins filled with bulk foods, grains, lentils, beans, things that can outlast a season. The smallest crock, this little green one, it's just tucked in there with the big moss. The smallest crock is particularly important to me. It's made from clay that I gathered from the banks of the Mississippi River here in Minneapolis just a month after moving here for grad school, with my advisor, Tetsuya Yamada. Inside the crock is honey-fermented garlic, a recipe he shared with me as an immune tonic for winter, which I needed as someone coming from California. I made it in the fall of 2023. Only now, years later, is it ready to eat, soft, sweet, and deeply umami. This slow alchemy, clay transforming through fire, garlic transforming through fermentation, embodies what I mean by timecraft. It's about making processes that unfold at the space of life, not production. Each container is both a tool and a metaphor. It keeps food alive, and it keeps cultural knowledge alive. In that sense, food prep is less a sculpture than a prototype for endurance, a proposal for how the acts of keeping, storing, and tending can be technologies of survival. This work in progress is called String Figures, hence why I'm passing around yarn to all of you. And it borrows the title and spirit from Donna Haraway. Haraway often returns to the children's game of cat's cradle as a metaphor for collaboration and survival, for the act of making with. No one can hold the pattern alone, it only exists through relation. Here, I'm translating that idea materially. The piece is built from about 200 yards of salvaged, hand-dyed silk, which basically I've been carrying around for years and took me the entire summer to dye completely black. I spun it into roughly 100 yards of thick black rope. The rope is looped in geometric configurations across the wall like a large-scale drawing or a map of shared tension. And the smaller photo is like the tests that I used to create the designs. The fingers that hold each crossing aren't human. They're rudimentary pulleys, carved from found wood, including pieces of old-growth red pine dating from the late 1600s, donated by the Dendrochronology Lab on campus. That detail matters to me. The way those tree rings literally hold centuries of weather, drought, fire, and adaptation. The material itself measures time. I could think of this piece as a kind of time instrument, an experiment in tension, collaboration, and endurance. It's both architectural and relational, a drawing made of forces. For me, this is what Haraway means by staying with the trouble, to hold the line together across generations and materials, and to keep the pattern alive, even as it shifts. This is a piece called Book Bag. It's built around an 18-foot-long, burnt wooden, shaker-style rack. On the top shelf sits an accordion book that folds into a box. The paper is handmade from the waste I generated during a 6-week residency in Scotland. Scraps of thread, pulp, clay dust, flower petals, bits of beeswax, and packing material, paper towels, all of it transformed into a new substrate. Each page carries a single word inspired by this line in Ursula K. Le Guin's text, quote, a leaf, a shell, a net, a gourd, a bag, a sling, a sack, a bottle, a pot, a box, a container, a holder, a recipient, end quote. Hanging from the rack, could someone close the door? It's like the most irritating sound. Thank you. Hanging from the rack below are my own interpretations of these recipients. A constellation of bags, vessels, pockets. Some are entirely handmade, others altered or repaired. A backpack sewn from couch leather found at the dump. Cotton seeds dyed with rust. A crochet drawstring pouch strung with porcelain beads. Every one of these objects is a container for relation. They hold more than materials. They hold stories of use, waste, and recovery. Eventually, the rack will carry headphones playing a spoken word recording of Le Guin's essay read by my own voice, a quiet chorus of the text running through the body. Together, the book and the bags form an archive of holding, a tactile bibliography of care, attention, and reuse. It's an invitation to think of literature and labor and survival as things that we carry together. When I step back and look at these projects together, food prep, string figures, book bag, carrier bag archway, and others, What connects them isn't a single medium or form, but a shared attention to care, stories, and maintenance of the webs that hold us together. Each piece is an act of tending to materials, to histories, to the slow processes that sustain life. Whether I'm working with clay gathered from the Mississippi, salvaged silk spun into rope, or recycled paper pulped from my own studio waste, I'm drawn to materials that already carry stories, that have lived other lives before they enter the work. The through line is a belief that making itself is a mode of attention, a way of listening to the world through touch. Across these works, I think of influence not as a declaration, but as a relationship. This is my interpretation of soft power, not persuasion or spectacle, but slow transformation through presence. The work doesn't insist, it lingers, it asks for proximity and for time. I often describe what I do as communication across scales between the body, the human and the ecological, the immediate and the geological, the intimate and the planetary. Making becomes a kind of translation, a way of passing knowledge between bodies and across time. Each object in that sense is both a message and a messenger, carrying forward the question of how we live with what we make, and how what we make might help us live with the world. Looking ahead, my next body of research expands on Joanna Macy's idea of nuclear guardianship, the question of how we live ethically with materials that will outlast us by thousands of years. I'm interested in the visual culture of nuclear contamination, how radiation, which is invisible and enduring, is represented, hidden, or misunderstood. We know these materials exist, yet they largely escape our senses and imagination. How do we create new languages, visual, tactile, and experiential, to comprehend something that resists human timescales? I'm approaching this through interdisciplinary research, hoping to collaborate with scientists, designers, and technologies to explore how traditional embodied practices of craft might interface with digital tools, in particular extended reality. The goal is not to illustrate contamination, but to create experiences of attention and responsibility, immersive spaces that help viewers feel the weight of nuclear time, the slowness of decay, and the possibility of care that extends beyond a single lifetime. In this sense, XR becomes another form of timecraft, a speculative tool for thinking across generations. I imagine environments where ancient craft gestures like containment or weaving overlap with data visualization and simulation, where we can walk through a digital landscape that is both archive and ritual, a space for remembering what we would otherwise forget. This project continues the core of my practice to understand technology not as escape, but stewardship, an art of holding and carrying forward what the world entrusts to us. As I come to a close, I want to return to the word timecraft. This idea that making is not just about form, but about how we live in time. Traditional skills are often framed as nostalgic, but to me, they're not about returning to the past. They're about remembering how to stay, how to remain present within a changing world. In a culture of acceleration and forgetting, craft teaches us a different rhythm. It teaches attention and the discipline of noticing. It teaches trust, the patience to work with materials rather than against them. And it teaches humility, the ability to hold space for uncertainty and to admit that not everything can be controlled or known. I think of craft as a form of soft power, quiet but persistent, and an act of hope, not as optimism, but as the practice of doing the work even when the outcome is unclear. Each act of making is a small participation in the ongoing work of making the future survivable, a way of rehearsing care across time, across generations, and across worlds. Thank you. Should we do a Q&A? Yes. Anybody?